Gil Dov HaKohen.
Oh, I didn't know you're Cohen. So we want to learn also tonight in honor of the memory of Ariel's dad, Akiva ben Gil Dova Cohen.
Yes.
The Shamash Rav and Aliyah.
Amen, amen, amen.
Be'ezrat Hashem, and she continue having nachas from you and his family. Okay,
Amen,
everyone,
amen, amen. Thank you very much. Yep.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Let's bring up to the text. We're learning the laws of Shabbos, and we are learning the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros. Eiruv Chatzeiros again are the Eiruv that permits the carrying within a private domain. So again, you have a private domain that's private, it's enclosed, it has all the rules that would make it a private domain, but it's a joint space, meaning to say it's a space of more than one owner. So each one has their own, like a chutzner, a courtyard. That's what's called Eiruv Chatzeiros, or an apartment building is also like an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So this nevertheless, even if it's all a private space amongst the various owners, nevertheless, it's still requires Shlomo Melech instituted that we should make a Eiruv Chatzeiros that would unite and combine the space so everyone could carry, and we don't forget the laws of carrying. It's a takana. Takana means he instituted because some people will end up living and spending their whole Shabbos in a courtyard. So like this reminds us that we have to remember the laws of Shabbos, and the only reason we're permitted to carry is because we have this private space. So we kind of make a reminder at takana. So based on all that, and we've learned all the definitions so far of how we make an Erev Chatzeiros, where we place it. It's a food item that has to be made either to be fresh weekly, or you could use matzos, as we said, or thin breads that would preserve and make it possible for it to remain from Pesach to Pesach. Some foods you could keep for a year, and then every Erev Pesach you would go and make a new Erev Chatzeiros, and that would stay fresh for the whole year, and it has to be accessible to everyone, etc. Now I believe we're holding law number 13. Mi she oichel b'makim echad, a person who eats in one place, v'yashain b'makim acher, but sleeps in another place. Makim achilasa hi ha'ikir l'inyan zeh. The place that we're talking about that requires the Eiruv Chatzeiros is the place where he eats or she eats. So here he says a fascinating law that if you don't ever eat, or the Shabbos you're not going to be eating in your apartment building. So for you to carry in the public place, in the combined private place, that's not the problem. The problem that has the restrictions that requires the Eiruv Chatzeiros is the place that you eat. So if you're eating in one place, then it's another place that has to be worked out. So you have to make the Erev Chatzeiros. What would be an example to this? Um, Maybe a dormitory and an eating hall that are not in the same chutzner. So if you have an eating hall and a dormitory in a different chutzner, possibly you would have you would have to have an Erev Chatzeiros in your eating place, and not necessary to have an Erev Chatzeiros in your sleeping place. Let's see what he says in footnote number 35. If he would really prefer to eat in the place where he sleeps, then the place where he sleeps is his legal residence. So the Rashba, Ritva, Prima and Bir Halacha say that if you're only eating in another place, technically, because you have nowhere else to eat, whatever the reason is, but in theory, you'd like to be eating in your private place. So then your private place needs the Erev Chatzeiros. Then, because that's really where you want, that's your primary place in your mind space. It's just technically you can't eat there because maybe you don't have food, you don't have a kitchen, you have nowhere to eat, no one to eat with, what have you. But if you would like to be eating in your place at home, so that has to become your place of that becomes a place that requires the Erev Chatzeiros. This is a complex law when you're dealing, let's say, with singles who Shabbos will always eat out. But the question is, it seems like what he's saying in this law is that the place that you're eating that's different than the place that you're sleeping, that needs the Erev Chatzeiros so you could carry the vessels into the courtyard. And otherwise it could very well be in this law. We have to check it a little better. It could very well be in this law that it's not even talking about it's a different courtyard. It could be that the problem is that in the courtyard itself, the public place that everyone has access to, that we've said is clearly the vessels that are in the courtyard can be carried around the courtyard. So if you have, let's say, let's just say the chutzner like we had in the picture, the illustration we had the past few weeks, right? I could bring it up if we need it, which is the different houses that go into a courtyard. So all the things that are in your courtyard things, you could carry around the courtyard. It's the things that you have at home to bring out to the courtyard. That's the problem. And or if you have two courtyards joining, so if the things from one courtyard to the next courtyard, but it's all about moving things out of their, like we said, different levels of privacy. So you're going from the privacy of your home to the more joint space of the courtyard. So that requires an Eiruv Chatzeiros to take the vessels from your house to the courtyard. Now, if your primary, let's say you have, let's say a kibbutz, they had the kibbutzim that people in the early days, the early kibbutzim, which there's some of them were religious kibbutzim, that there was a kitchen, that everyone ate in the kitchen, no one ate at home. So seemingly in such a scenario, based on the law we just learned, so the stuff from your house you could carry to your courtyard because you're not eating there. That's not your eating place. That's just your sleeping place. And it's the vessels in the kitchen that is a problem. The same thing would apply again. A hotel is different laws in general because it's not really you don't rent in a hotel. You don't own a hotel. You only rent the space for the weekend, and the owner has still ownership in the building, in your apartment, in your room. It's his things that you're using. So the typical example of an apartment in an apartment building would be where everything is private, is owned by you. But things that are owned by one owner, that kind of makes it like it's just really you're a guest, and the guest doesn't have the restrictions of different ownerships. But let's say you had like a kibbutz where you had your private apartment and you ate in a kitchen, or in an event where sometimes let's say people have like kind of hotels for the holiday vacations where you also don't eat in your house. You only eat in a kitchenette, in the like it's like a hotel, but it's private apartments, and everyone eats in a kitchen. Let's even say it like an old age home. An old age home, and again, I'm not sure how the old age home works, but if the old age home is a private apartment or a retirement home, it's a private apartment, and you don't cook at all at home, and all the food is done in the communal kitchen, that would be maybe this case where the kitchen becomes the private space and your home is like an extension of the courtyard where you could carry things from your home where you're sleeping to the courtyard. Here's the thing, that the place that becomes private is based on the food. But here, that's why it's important to mention the 35. It could be some people that they have no choice. They have to eat in the kitchen, in the joint place. But if in theory they would like to eat into in the home, it's just that they can't do it because whatever reason that holds them back. Then maybe that even your place. Aaron, one second. I saw your hands raised. So then it's the then it's the then it's then it's the Rashba says that if you want to eat at home in the place that you sleep, and it's just that you eat somewhere else, then it could be that your home also requires the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Based on this, before we get to your question, Aaron, the famous Sicha the Rebbe talks about many times about his father when he got smicha, when they forgot to make the sukkah on Shabbos Cholamoid, and they wanted to know if they could carry because they didn't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. The question would be based on this law. If they would have a problem, I guess the problem would be going into the sukkah, not really taking the things out of the house, unless you could say that the house, in such a case, is kind of like the Rashba says, where you're really eating at home. It's just over this weekend where you're eating in the sukkah. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so my mother-in-law lives in, you can call it a retirement home. It's independent living, they just, whatever. So each apartment has a kitchen, but they do have breakfast and lunch down in a main room. If you choose to eat there, you don't have to. And it's totally Jewish, it's totally kosher. No one in there is not Jewish. Okay, and you all live a different version of Orthodox. So going downstairs on Shabbos, they have definitely have 100% meal. And in that room, they also have a kitchen with a stove and an oven. So you have both places. So does that mean anything?
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of referring to. It seems like from the law, it says, it seems like based on the footnote number 35, I would have to say that if you have a kitchenette in your studio, what have you, and it depends if it's just used for coffee and snacks, like light snacks or refreshments. I don't know. It's a very good question. I mean, in theory, I'm sure that
Okay, so they're definitely
hold
not.
on, hold on, Aaron. I'm sure that the building either it's in the Eiruvei of, let's say, Brooklyn, so it doesn't need an Eiruvei. That means in this actual specific case, either they have an Eiruv Chatzeiros or they're included in the Eiruv Chatzeiros of the general Eiruvei. But in theory, if they didn't have an Eiruv Chatzeiros and they were not included in the Eiruvei, then it's an excellent question. I would have to check. Sorry,
Well,
what do you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, just that it's definitely 100% used more than just for coffee. Because I know we went for Shavuos, the dairy lunch at my mother-in-law's, and she cooked the whole meal in her place. But if you wanted, you could have gone down and ate.
Okay, so then that would kind of based on footnote number 35, which says that if like you want to eat at home and you're not eating at home because you're whatever the reason is then your home becomes the primary place. I would have to assume in such a place where your mother-in-law is able to cook a full meal for Shavuos in
Now,
her in her in
yeah,
her in her apartment, even if she's eating in another place, and it could also very well be that it depends Shabbos by Shabbos. That if one Shabbos she's eating at home only, then that becomes her primary place. The next Shabbos, if she's eating like it could be like the story of Sukkot, where if she eats usually at home, so that Shabbos that she's at home, that's her primary eating place, and then that needs the Eiruv Chatzeiros. If she's only going to eat in the kitchen over Shabbos, and she's going to in the dining room, in the general dining room, and she's just going to have coffee, what have you, tea in her apartment, and some fruit for snacks. So then possibly, then she wouldn't. It very well could be that it depends on the Shabbos. That's why the Rebbe's father had the question, we're on Sukkot, where usually you eat at home, so it's not such a problem. But now at Sukkot, everyone's eating in the Sukkah. So then that Shabbos, they're kind of eating in a different place. It ended up being that the Sukkah was the Eiruv Chatzeiros. But before the answer, the question was that they're not eating at home, and therefore now they require an Eiruv Chatzeiros.
now I'm just gonna just put one little note. It is run there. It is run by one of the shuls in the community, and then they get donations and a whole bunch of things. But the point is that the rabbi there, I never talked to him about these situations because this is the first time we're learning about it. But yeah, they kind of run it.
It's a good question to ask. It's not a foolish question to ask. You could ask him what's with the Erev Chatzeros. He'll probably tell you either we make one, or he'll tell you we rely on the Erev Chatzeros of the bar park, wherever it is, or Flatbush.
Yeah, it's in Kings Highway East Third. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So now we have a next law number 14. Ha mis areach bechatzer. If someone regarding a visiting guest in the court yard, meaning someone is a guest for Shabbos. Yeshaim da filus nis arach bais if neatzme im loy nis arach derch keva ela lishloishim yoim ela pachas misa any oisra bnei chatzer. Now, let's say a person is a guest and takes rents a whole home in the courtyard, not just a room, but rents a whole home in the courtyard. So he says there are those who say that even if he or she takes the whole home, but it's not there permanently, meaning up to 30 days, kind of short-term rental, that person doesn't break up the unification of the Eiruv Chatzeiros, because like we said, everyone has to participate. So if one person doesn't participate, it breaks the union. But if a person is just doing a short-term rental of up to 30 days, that short-term rental doesn't break it up. For instance, when I went to South Africa for my son's wedding, so the place, of course, everyone knows South Africa, if it's an apartment complex, it's all gated because of the security concerns. So that's a straight up gated area with no breaches, 100% walled place. And if I'm not mistaken, it was actually built by the Chabad Torah Academy. So I think it's only a Jewish kind of place of living. I don't believe anyone who lives there is not Jewish. I'm not sure about Shabbos observant, but Jewish. So and we took a short-term rental. We took a full house there in the complex. So in theory, if they were using an Erev and they don't have an Erev Chatzeiros and we were using an Erev Chatzeiros, I'm sure they do use an Erev Chatzeiros where they have an Erev in the city. I forget if they have an Erev in the city, but either way, we wouldn't be breaking it up because we were there less than 30 days, according to the Yesh Omrim, according to the opinion about this. That person is not considered like breaking the union. And therefore everyone's allowed to carry, because even if you didn't participate, you're, so to say, a guest. Not just that the other people could take from their houses to the courtyard, but also you could take from your house that you've rented short term to the courtyard, because you're a guest and you're not considered a private house, even for your own home, as far as the privacy of taking the vessels out or the things out from your house to the courtyard. He says, even if there's not just a small one individual, but even, let's say, a big group comes and rents this house, so even here says another case. Now let's say you have a scenario where there's more guests. There's only one a person. Everyone else is guests in the courtyard. Either you're the host or they all renting houses. Nevertheless, in such a case, it's still, they're all considered guests, and therefore they don't break, so to say, the permissibility, the idea that you could carry from the houses into the courtyard. But there has to be one person that's set as that's their primary residence full time. And even if that person isn't Jewish. Meaning, the idea is like this. What he's trying to say in this law is, because he's saying it a little, and we learned the Rambam a little differently. This law is basically that the requirement for Eiruv Chatzeiros is when there's a whole bunch of permanent residents that together live in a courtyard. But if you have one person that's permanent, the rest of the people are his guests, and according to the Eshamim, even if they're his guests in a whole home, he has a few homes in the courtyard. Even if the primary host is a Gentile, there's no requirement for Eiruv Chatzeiros, because Eiruv Chatzeiros requires that if there's one Jew doesn't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros, because he's only one person. You need an Eiruv Chatzeiros if there's at least two permanent residents. But if there's one permanent residence and the rest are guests, the guests don't count. So it's not like a whole bunch of people living in a courtyard. It's one private home. Just like in your own backyard, you don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. And even if that person's a Gentile, the fact that you're not a permanent resident in this courtyard doesn't fit the criteria of King Solomon's takana to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. King Solomon wanted that to make sure that permanent residents that join together in a courtyard shouldn't forget the laws of Shabbos, and therefore they should make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. But if you're all guests, it's a temporary, and as far as we're concerned, we see it as only one resident, Jew or Gentile, and therefore it's not a combined space, and therefore it's one private residence, and therefore everyone can carry inside their houses from their houses to the courtyard. So says the Ad Ephraim. Everyone doesn't count. Everyone's nullified to the primary resident, Jew or Gentile, and this basically is why a hotel doesn't need a Eiruv Chatzeiros. Because a hotel, many reasons. One of the reasons, first reason is, even if the hotel also has, you don't own anything in the hotel. The bed sheets and the furniture, everything, the small furniture, the heavy furniture, they all belong to the hotel owner, management. So therefore, you're just a guest. And if you're just a guest, then unless there's permanent, you have sometimes hotels that also have permanent residents in the hotel. That's different. But here he says there's one catch. This idea that we look at the primary residence versus the guest is only if there's at least one primary resident. But if there's no primary resident, then the whole primary residence falls off, and now everyone becomes individual guests. And if everyone's an individual guest, and everyone has their own eating place, because it's the eating place that dictates, not that everyone has a joint kitchen, because again, the joint kitchen makes it one place, and then of course you don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros because you're all eating in one kitchen. So then it's a problem. Now, so what do you do? What happens if one of the guests is also a Gentile? So he's just as so to say permanent as, which is really temporary, as everyone else. We're going to learn later, what do you do when you have a Gentile in a communal space? How does that person not break up the union? So what they do is they have to rent that space from the Gentile, and he becomes So his space doesn't break up the union. But some people who disagree with this whole law, and they hold that if someone is even a temporary resident, a guest, but has their own eating place separate from the owner, they don't eat in the owner's home. Basically, again, the rule is the food dictates the primary location. If everyone's eating in one kitchen, that itself makes it, then there's no separation. The problem is if everyone's eating in their own houses, and then we want to carry from our houses to the courtyard, that's not allowed unless you make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. But if anyone's anyways eating in one kitchen, like Aaron talks about the communal dining room of a old age home, for instance, so then that would, and there's no private kitchens, so then there's no requirement because then everyone has one place. There's no separate place. It's the food that dictates. So here he's saying that even if you're not a primary resident, and you rent your own apartment, and in your apartment you have your own kitchen, and you make your own Shabbos, then you have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. And therefore he says, because there's two opinions, one should be more strict and go with the more stringent opinion. Hold on, Aaron. If you can. Therefore, you can't make a blessing. Why? Because Safek Brachas La'akil, meaning to say, we don't know 100% what the law is. We have two opinions, and according to the lenient opinion, there's no requirement for the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Therefore, we can't clearly say a bracha, but you should make the Eiruv Chatzeiros without the blessing. But if for whatever reason you didn't or you couldn't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, then you could rely on the first opinion that says that a guest less than 30 days is not a primary resident and therefore doesn't require to be part of the union. Yes. Yes, Aaron.
Okay. In Yeshiva University, using that as an example. So
Also a very good example. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so they have for Shabbos in their dorm rooms, they may have a black that's electric, or they may have a microwave that they use during the week, but not during Shabbos. But then they have all the dorms. Everyone's Jewish again, but there is a place communal eating. But they may from time to time have a meal. They consider it a meal.
You
students.
You say it's a snack.
What?
You would call it
Well, I'm saying is that like for my son when he was there, so he would consider it his breakfast every morning, but his main meals are in the cafeteria. But okay. I'm asking because they have to go places they might want to, I'm just.
So the yeshiva is a very good example, even more than the retirement home, because the retirement home usually kind of has that both. You have like the full kitchen in your apartment that you could sometimes eat supper, dinner, breakfast, lunch, and supper as you choose alone, and then you have the communal kitchen when you're in the mood of being social. But in the yeshiva system, usually, aside from just having, like you say, a cholent or something on the blech or a bowl of cereal and milk in the morning, the primary place of eating is in the dining room. Seemingly, he doesn't define eating. If eating is any kind of food, like a meal, like at the end of the day, is a bowl of cereal and milk is a meal. I mean, it's not a washing like a Shabbos, or the primary place of eating. I have to check if the law would apply, let's say, like you said, in your son's dorm, where he eats every morning breakfast, cereal, milk, and then Shabbos afternoon, maybe if he's lazy, he'll have just a cholent in his room. If that would break up, separate him from the, so to say, the communal kitchen.
My question to you is, I've learned this, my son said this, and my daughter's going to go to the girls' campus, which it goes back from Israel. But my point is that if you have bread, just plain bread, and you have a certain amount, especially on Shabbos, is considered a full meal.
I get that, but we're not talking about bread. I'm talking about like a bowl of cereal and milk.
Well, definitely that's what I'm talking about, because sometimes, as you said, he's lazy.
Okay, and you're right. A sandwich, if someone makes a quick sandwich, which is two slices of bread, which is definitely the amount. We have to see. Let's see. Maybe the footnotes will give us a little help. If not, we'll have to check a little more. Okay, if rent, so 37 he says, 36 is just a reference. 37 he says, if one rented for more than 30 days, he prohibits the people to carry on Shabbos as of the beginning of the rental. So the Mishnah Berurah points out that we don't wait for the 30 days to kick in for that person to have to start participating in the Eiruv Chatzeiros. If initially you've rented it for 60 days, or for more than 30 days, then right away from the beginning, you are required to join the union. And if you don't, you're breaking up the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Again, one of the conditions of the Eiruv Chatzeiros is everyone has to join. You can't, that's why it's so hard. That's why I was trying to figure out, for instance, like a city like Yerushalayim or Flatbush, any of these places don't have 100% Shabbos observant people and don't have 100% Jewish people necessarily. So how don't those people break up the Eiruv Chatzeiros when you have these big cities? So it is a bit of a problem. So what you have to do is you go to the municipality and have them join the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Even they do that in America, where the municipality, let's say, I don't know if it works on New York City or the boroughs or the neighborhoods, but the person who has some sort of authority, that whether it's taxes or garbage collection or something, that kind of they have some sort of ownership even on even though you own your space, but by paying taxes and being part of this community, you have some responsibility that they have responsibility for you, and they could make certain decisions that affect you. That level of, so to say, ownership allows for them to sign on behalf of the Gentiles and the non-observant Shabbos people to not break up the union, and you rent the space from them, like we said, and therefore it doesn't break up the union. But in theory, if there's someone who lives there for more than 30 days, and you know you're going to live there for 30 days, everyone has to join. And if you don't join, it's not just you're not part of it. You disrupt it for everyone. No one could use it. No one could use the Eiruv Chatzeiros if there's one person who doesn't join the union. Okay. So the Mishnah Berurah points out that if you rent a space and you're renting it for 60 days or more than 30 days, you have to join from the beginning, or at least make some sort of accommodation from the beginning. Footnote number 38. In a community situation, even one who visits for more than 30 days is included when the Eruv is made. This is the ruling of the best in Jewish court and is automatic. The inclusion of guests need not be spelled out when making the Eruv. Okay, so here he's kind of going on what we just said before. So in a community situation where it's not just there's a kahal, and the kahal, there's a rabbi and a bezdin that acts on behalf of the community, like if there's an Eruv. So even one who visits for more than 30 days is included right away in the Eruv. And therefore, you don't have to ask him, and that person is immediately included and doesn't have to be specified so and so. Ariel, did you invite someone called Robert Sidi? If not, I can't let him in. I don't know who that is. So it says the Taz and the Mishnah Berurah. Okay.
I did. Yes, I did. I did.
Okay. Got it. Let him in.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so now, let's see footnote number 39. So footnote, okay, that basically is how it works. Of why what he says in 38 is how it works. Basically, the kahal or the rabbi or whatever it is, who's the person who's in charge of organizing things for the community, is the one that on behalf of the community makes the Eiruv Chatzeiros. You don't have to sign a petition or sign on to a paper because, right? I live in Yerushalayim. I don't remember, and I'm here more than 30 days. And Aaron, you live in Flatbush, and those are Ariel, those who live in cities that have an Eruv. I don't know if you ever had to sign a paper that says you're participating in the Eiruv Chatzeiros. It's if you're part of the community, then on behalf of the community, you know, or you don't know. But either way, the community heads are signing on your behalf because we don't take a consensus to see who's looking to join or not. That's what his point is in 38. Yes, Aaron.
I was just saying, no, I never signed anything. No one in my family did.
All right. Footnote number 39. It says, what about even if he's a non-Jew, means if the non-Jew, let's say like a hotel, a non-Jew management of the hotel, so then it's again, as long as there's a balabayas kavua that lives that has ownership, and that person is always there, is permanently there. So then the guests don't count. So he says like this: if the non-Jew in the building does not own the apartment in which which the guests are staying, they do not become secondary to him, and they prohibit one another to carry. So here he's quoting a complicated thing. This Gentile has to be permanent, has to be actually an owner, have to have ownership. He can't be a person who's renting long term. Again, if the non-Jew in the building does not own the apartment, in which the guests are staying, they do not become secondary to him, and they prohibit one another from carrying. They must make an Eruv and rent non-Jewish the non-Jewish residents. So says the Mishnah Brura 370. Again, the laws of Eiruv Chatzeiros are very complicated. They're much more complicated than actually the regular Eruv. The regular Eruv is kind of simple. I mean, it's not simple. There's a lot of management.
What about the hotel in Borough Park run by a Jew and it has a kosher restaurant?
Again, the hotel is run by a Jew, so the Jew owns it. So therefore, it's that's the hotels. First of all, the hotels in the Eruv, so therefore it's included anyways. But we're talking about in a situation where you have to make a private Eiruv Chatzeiros that's not included in the community. So in Borough Park, it's not a problem. The problem is going to be if it's in a place that's not in an Eruv and it's not owned by a Jew and he doesn't have resident, he just rents. So then all the people would have. I mean, if you were in theory if there's no ownership of a hotel, that or let's say I don't know what means ownership. Let's say if a long-term lease, if someone leases from a real estate conglomerate, you lease a hotel, and you're the Gentile, and the person's the Gentile, and the Gentile has a hotel, and in the hotel it's not in the Eruv, and he has a guest that are all Jewish. So there's only one Gentile who himself doesn't really own it because he's only leasing it. So then in such a situation, possibly you actually need an Eiruv Chatzeiros to carry through the hotel because all the guests, because the owner is not a Jew, so therefore the guests don't become secondary to the owner, and the owner himself doesn't own it because he's only leasing it from a real estate conglomerate. I don't know if leasing is more ownership than a regular rental, and therefore maybe that would make him the owner if you own the lease. That's another question in the laws of leasing and ownership. But if it's not considered ownership, then yeah, if you go to a hotel that's not in the Eruv and it's a whole bunch of Jewish people and there's no permanent resident there that's Jewish, then you would have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros according to, again, that's what I'm saying. The Eiruv Chatzeiros is much more complicated than the regular Eruv. According to the Mishnah Brura 370 in the Bira Halacha Trim Sadeshin. If the non-Jew does not own these apartments and the guests are renting from him, like a hotel that's leased, the Yad Ephraim says that they are considered his guests and do not need an Eruv. Okay. So the Mishnah, so they say like this: if the first case is that if a non-Jew is in the building and does not own the apartments which the guests are staying, they do not become secondary to him because he's not an owner himself, and therefore he's not an owner himself, and therefore they would have to make an Eruv. But in this case, is if the non-Jew does own if the non-Jew does own these apartments and the guests are renting from him, the Yad Ephraim says, and they are considered his guests and do not need an Eruv. So again, if the non-Jew owns the hotel, hey Rebecca, and you're renting from him, so then you don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros according to the Yad Ephraim, like we quoted before. The Pri Megadim say they must rent the property of the non-Jew, and the Pri Megadim says that he agrees with the Yad Ephraim, and he says that actually they would have to rent the property from the non-Jew, and so like this, otherwise he disrupts the union. So like this, he won't disrupt the union for the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Okay. Number 40. Even, what are we talking about over here? But when the people in the court are guests, they do not prohibit one another of carrying. Okay. Let's just see it inside. Sorry. If they're all guests, but when the people in the courtyard are guests, they do prohibit one another from carrying. If there's no owner, that's according to the opinion that either they're Gentile or Jew, according to the Yad Ephraim, or according to Pri Megadim, even the Gentile is the owner, that creates a problem, then you do need to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Even if they are visiting for less than 30 days, even if only for one Shabbos. Again, so if there's no, according to the Pri Megadim, if you go to a hotel that's owned by a Gentile, even if it's owned by the Gentile, never mind if the Gentile doesn't own it, because most hotels are not really owned by the management. But let's even say it's owned by the Gentile. And so according to the Pri Megadim, you still have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, and you'd have to actually work it out with the owner. And according to I mean, again, unless you don't want to carry, not every time you have to carry, but if you want to carry things from your hotel room to the lobby, would be a problem. And according to the Yad Ephraim, that would apply if there's no ownership that's there. If everyone is just guests, then you would have to make an Erev, even just for one Shabbos, for a Shabbaton, say. Yes, Aaron.
What about Chabad houses that are definitely not in such big Jewish areas, but when you go to visit, you make sure that you can stay?
That's not a problem because the Chabad house is owned by the rabbi, and you're a guest of the rabbi. That's different. Here we're talking about a case where there's no permanent resident, or according to the opinion that the Gentile doesn't count as a permanent resident.
So I would not need to make it, even though he has apartments or rooms for.
No, yeah, it's a good question. My father's old Chabad in Seattle. They had, that was exactly the scenario. They didn't have kitchen. I don't believe they had 2 floors that had like just literally rooms. They had communal bathrooms, and I think each floor had its own kitchenette, and there was a downstairs dinette, the dining room. I don't know if they served meals or not. But my father was one. They were all guests, but if they were permanent residents more than 30 days, then my father would have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros for them to carry, and they would
You
have.
just said even if it was one Shabbos.
Yeah, that's it. That's if you're a guest. But if over 30 days, you're no longer a guest.
Okay.
But again, it also depends. Like Rebecca, we were checking about in these places where there's another condition that if you're renting a place and the owner has access to your apartment, it means has things in the apartment. It means you're really only renting the ability to sleep there. You don't own the apartment. You're not renting the apartment per se. Like if you come in there, there's a bed already, and there's a light table, there's a night table, and all those things belong to the ownership. So that that also disrupts the privacy of the person. But here we're talking about where a person's a guest in a place that kind of has some sort of level of privacy. But we didn't get to that point yet. Okay. He says it is proper to okay, so we said before that this is all according to one opinion, but there's another opinion that says that there's no difference between a guest or an owner. Whoever has their own room to eat in, again, it's all food is the main thing here. Then they're the balabayas, and therefore you have to make it Eiruv Chatzeiros. And if you can be machmir, and make an Eiruv Chatzeiros without a blessing. So he says in footnote number 42, the Bir Halacha 378 says not to deviate from the Shulchan Aruch, which doesn't say which one is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, Rashba, who are lenient. Okay. So actually, the Bir Halacha says don't even make lechatchila an erev without a bracha. Just keep with what the Shulchan Aruch writes, which the main opinion is to be lenient that a guest less than 30 days does not have to make a Eiruv Chatzeiros and is nullified towards the ownership to the main ownership. And according to the opinion, it could be a Gentile. According to other opinions, it cannot be a Gentile. Okay. That's what I'm saying. An Eiruv Chatzeiros, that's why it makes it complicated. But let's just review the past 2 laws that we learned. The past 2 laws that we learned teach us 2 very important points. The number 1 point is that when we're looking to see what is a private space and what is a communal space, and the private space breaks up that even though there's a chutzner, there's a courtyard, which is a private domain, right? And there's all the criterias of a private domain, meaning there's walls or an erev, what have you, that in theory should be a private domain you should carry. King Solomon instituted that if there's private individuals in this courtyard and they have private residencies, that they have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros so they could carry from their homes into the joint courtyard. Now, what makes it separate entities of houses in a chutzner is if there's separate places of eating in each chutzner. So we discussed the dormitories and the old age homes that have mainly dinettes, kitchen that they all eat together, and do they require an Eiruv Chatzeiros if they're eating? And then we even had the opinion that says even if a person eats in a separate place, but wants to eat in their home, that could also their mind where they want to be could create that space. So the one thing is the food is the center idea over here. Where are they eating? Are they eating in a communal place or are they eating in separate places? That's number 1. And what's defined as eating? Like Aaron asked, is his son cereal, milk, or sandwich daily in his own house or even on Shabbos create a separate space and therefore needs an Eiruv Chatzeiros? Number 2 question is about what kind of residents are we talking about? Are we talking about residents that are permanent or temporary? If you're a guest, so the primary person is an individual, as if he's one person, or if there's 2 people, then those 2 people have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros between themselves. But the guest doesn't interrupt that and doesn't disrupt that. And other opinions are more strict and say no. Even a guest has to join in the Eiruv Chatzeiros and must make it. And the question is also what happens in a situation where there's only guests and then everyone kind of gets upgraded to the same level, and therefore you would again require the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So these are all complicated laws, which actually are very applicable if you think about it, like we said, in hotel situations or dormitory situations that happen all the time. But again, back to the Rebbe's father's question, that sukkah, where everyone had a communal sukkah to eat, but the Rebbe's father answered that the communal sukkah itself is the joint eating place. That gives us a whole insight of the Eiruv Chatzeiros, because that the focus is the food. And if there's a sukkah is like a dining room, and if you build a sukkah, by building the sukkah for the community, that creates a communal space where everyone eats. Even though, according to Chabad, there's very possible that he ate certain things outside of that sukkah. But the fact that he made the sukkah itself was making Eiruv Chatzeiros. It's actually less simple than when you hear the story, because there's so many laws that are involved in that. Okay.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Okay, so I did this once, but I didn't live there. But my friend did in 770 on Sukkot. Like hundreds of sukkahs are out, and everyone like leaves a loaf of bread, and people go around to see, and some wine. Everyone goes around to see how many blessings they can make in each. I mean, how many sukkahs they can make a blessing in one night. And is that an Erev Chatzeiros for Shabbos?
No, because first of all, after it would only possibly be an Erev Chatzeiros if it's in an enclosed space. If it's separate houses that don't have an Erev, then it has to be in a Reshus HaYachid, in a private domain. The whole Erev Chatzeiros is that the place is a private domain, like the picture we showed past few weeks, right? The courtyard in Crown Heights is different homes. It's not. It means if you don't hold by the Erev in Crown Heights, each home is its own. Each sukkah is only itself in a private domain, but the next person's sukkah is in its own private domain. So therefore, you're carrying from one. That's a different scenario. But because we're talking about in a communal space to carry from your house to the sukkah. But just coming in and saying a l'chaim, does that make it a communal sukkah? It's a good question. I mean, if you let's say in the event you have a courtyard, and in the courtyard you have a private sukkah, and you leave food out for anyone to come in and eat it, it's probably by definition it's a very good question. By definition, that would be an Eiruv Chatzeiros, because you part food and actually you're letting everyone come in. But we did learn the Eiruv Chatzeiros has to be a maitzi. Here it's mizonis, so it could be that the food quality is not good enough. But in theory,
But it's a regular kosher loaf of, it's a challah. It's the proper challah for a Shabbos meal.
If it's a challah, then that's there. That would probably be the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Yes, good point. If it was placed there before Shabbos.
It was definitely, they leave them there and let anyone come in, and hundreds of people go in and out.
Yeah, beautiful, simple. Yeah, very good, excellent question. But I just want to say, you have to remember that just in the scenario of Crown Heights, if let's say there is an Eiruv there, but a lot of people don't hold by there. So let's take the Eiruv out for a second. So in Crown Heights, the question would only be, you can't carry on Shabbos in the street if there's no Eiruv. So there's no carrying in the street, because there's nothing. That's the Eiruv Chatzeiros doesn't help you with that. The Eiruv Chatzeiros would help if for the person, let's say a few houses making a single Eiruv around, and even if they have individual sukkahs, not a communal sukkah. If they didn't make an Eiruv, they would have to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. If they didn't make an Eiruv Chatzeiros, then it could be that what you're saying is the fact that they're leaving chalas and wine in their sukkahs and letting anyone come in, that itself would be an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Could be, possibly. All right. Let's see law number 16. Afilu im ha'eni Yehudi dar b'chatzer acheres, ele she'en le'derech l'reshus harab rak derech ha'chatzer she'Yisraelim darim ba, aishu dar ba'aliyah v'amreges l'seich ha'chatzer gam ken Yisraelim. Okay, I think we're holding 15. Yeah, sorry. Law number 15. Yisrael, because 16 is a follow-up of 15. Yisrael hadarim ein Yehudi b'chatzer achas. Okay, what about in the case now where it's very possible you have one Jew and one Gentile living in a joint courtyard, right? It could also be a few Jews and one Gentile, a few Jews and it could be, but we're talking about two houses minimum in a courtyard. One is Jew, one's Gentile. What do you do then? The Gentile doesn't have to keep Shabbos, right? So here are the questions like this. So in such a scenario, Ha'eni Yehudi Ein ha'eni Yehudi oyser love. So then, in that case, where there's one Jew and one Gentile in a chutzner, the non-Jew doesn't make it prohibited for the Jew to carry from his home to the courtyard. The Jew, he or she, could carry from the courtyard to the house and the house to the courtyard. Even if there's more than two Jews and a Gentile. Let's say in a case where the more than one Jew don't need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. Like we said before, whether they're guests or children eating on their father's home, what have you. Again, then if the Jews are one entity, even if they're more than one Jew, but they're one group because either they're guests of this one Jew or they're the children of the one Jew, what have you. So then one Jew, a single group, and one Gentile. So then the Gentile doesn't disrupt the privacy of the one Jew. Then you don't need, everything's fine. You can carry in the courtyard to the house, etc. Let's say the two Jews do need an Eiruvei between each other because they're two private homes. They're not children living in their parents' home. And then let's say you have three people living in the building, three private homes in one courtyard, two Jews and one Gentile. The two Jews are Jewish and want to make an Eiruvei so they could carry from their house to the courtyard. But what do you do about the Gentile that also lives there? And he also has joint access to the courtyard. Does he disrupt this union? He does. You have to rent the space of the Gentile, so he's basically becoming a guest in your space because you're renting his space from him, and therefore he doesn't disrupt the privacy of the two Jews who want to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. This is just the scenario over here is what we're trying to get at. The basis of this is that a courtyard, what Shlomo Melech said, a courtyard means there's more than one individual living in a joint space. Everyone has access to the apartment. There has to be an Eiruv Chatzeiros because there's more than two Jews. You have a Gentile that doesn't have to keep Shabbos. It's not that he or she has no responsibility to keep Shabbos. It's not for them. He is not allowed to keep Shabbos. But he has access to the apartment like everyone else, to the courtyard. His access to the courtyard means that it's not one union because there's three people there. And if that's the case, you have to have an Eiruv Chatzeiros between the two Jews. But they don't own 100% the joint space. There's a Gentile there. So they have to basically take away his ownership by him agreeing to rent his space out. And that's the basis of how an Eiruvei works today. New York City, Manhattan, Borough Park, Flatbush. There's plenty of Gentiles who don't keep Shabbos. So how do you have an Eiruv Chatzeiros? How are you allowed to carry? These people are disrupting the unity. Even if you have all the poles and all the walls whatever the telephone wires, whatever you're using, to technically make this a Rishus Yachid, you still need an Eiruv Chatzeiros. So how are you allowed to carry from your house to the courtyard, i.e., outside? You're not allowed to. You could take something from outside and you could carry it, but you can't carry from your house to outside. Just like from your house to chutzner. So what do they have to do? You can't go to every individual in Flatbush and rent his space from him. It's not possible. So what they do is they go to the municipality. And if not for the idea that the municipality has some sort of ownership always of the area, and they could represent all the people, including the Gentiles of that area, they could rent a space to the Jewish people and allow for them to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros. And that's the condition. The same thing applied to Jerusalem for practical purposes. Because Jerusalem also has Gentiles in it. And they also would be disrupting the Eiruv Chatzeiros. And again, so therefore an Eiruvei wouldn't help you. You wouldn't be able to carry in Borough Park or Flatbush because there's Gentiles living there. So the only way to do it is they have to figure out a way how to rent that space from all the Gentiles. And that's, again, not possible. So they have to go to some sort of community representation that represents all the people of that area, including the Gentiles. And they're going to say, okay, we're renting to the Jewish residents the space for Shabbos. So it's more complicated, like I said, than people would think. So, Azim Dasham Eini Gam Yehudihu Aiser Lehem, and therefore you have to rent Vim Dam Sham Shnei Nachrim. He says, what about if there's more than one Gentile? You have to rent from each one. So like I said, you have Flatbush or Borough Park, there's many of Gentiles. So how could you rent from each person or Manhattan, let's say? So you have to, of course, go to the municipality. That's what I heard is what's being done. Okay. Footnote number 43. If two or more Jews are required to make an Eruv, then they also prohibit to carry, the Gentile prohibits to carry. The Chassam Sofer, who lived in Hungary, or Achaim 92, also see the Maharam Shik 182 and the Maharsham Volume 5, Law 5, responds, I'm assuming, for 34, who are lenient in certain circumstances. I guess, again, this is a big question, because if not for figuring out this issue, then there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros, and if there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros, then there's no point of putting up an Eruv. There's a point still, because basically, if you leave your carriage outside, let's say the Eruv is there for taking children into shul. So then you could leave your carriage outside and leave your carriage outside the shul, and then or outside the house you're visiting, and then you don't need the Eiruv Chatzeiros. But if you wanted to take something from your house, if the carriage is in the house, or if you wanted to take, I don't know, a bottle of wine, what have you, from your house, and if there's no Eiruv Chatzeiros, you can't carry even if there's an Eruv in the city. And therefore the Chassam Sofer and the others had to figure out the leniencies of how you deal with big cities that have an Eruv, and there's obviously more than one Gentile living in there. Okay. 44 says from each one of them. The Ramah and Be'er Ha'agola 382:15 say, this applies only if the non-Jew lives in a separate apartment. The Mishnah Brura 382:51 poskim are machmer even if they share one house. The Chai Adam is machmer if each has his own space in a room. If one is a live-in worker, he and the owner are as one person, and is enough to rent from one of them. You don't have to rent from each. If there's two Gentiles living in a house, so the question is, how many Gentiles do you have to rent from? Do you have to rent from every Gentile, or every Gentile who's staying in there, or the primary Gentile, or the primary? Okay, I'm talking about who's disrupting the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So there's different opinions of how detailed you have to go, but again, at the end of the day, in the big cities that have an Eruv, there's no way to talk to every individual, and not every. The question is, what happens if a person is I don't know, an anti-Semite, and says, you know what, I specifically don't agree to be part of the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So could he disrupt or she disrupt the Eiruv Chatzeiros? I think the fact that they go to the municipality is that they don't have a choice, because the municipality, just because they have certain rights over every individual who lives there, whether they like it or not. If you live there, then you're under the municipality. Then the municipality could, by force, speak on behalf of all the people who live there, and therefore be the ones to rent out the space to the Jews for the Eiruv Chatzeiros. Like you can imagine, this is not an easy topic at all. Okay. Let's do one more law, and then we'll just close up with questions. Let's say it's not, he doesn't even live in your chatzar. There's, like we have in the pictures, there's two joint chatzars. There's an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard. But he has access, he has to walk through your courtyard to get to the public domain. Even if he has his own courtyard, or if, let's say, he lives upstairs. And he goes from the upstairs into the downstairs, and now he joins the courtyard. Then he also disrupts the Eiruv Chatzeiros and has to rent out his space to allow for the Jews to make an Eiruv Chatzeiros until they rent the rishus from the non-Jew, as we said before. Okay, we'll stop over here. Anyone have any questions on this so far? If there's no questions, we'll do one more law. Let's say the courtyard itself is owned by a Jew. But he's renting out space to Gentiles. So here he says something else. There's one condition. If the Jew owns the courtyard, let's say the Jew owns an apartment building, and he rents out his space to the Gentile, and the Jewish person is Torah observant conscious, he's not going to give ownership to the Gentile anytime that would allow for the Gentile to disrupt the Eiruv Chatzeiros. So therefore, as much as he's renting out space to him, he's leaving private ownership to the apartment he's renting out, so that as enough to keep it part of the union. Even if it doesn't live there, but just by being owner, meaning to say the Gentile doesn't have enough ownership, and this is the basis. This is the law. That's the basis of how the Eruv works, because the municipality is may not be the Jew, but is the Gentile on behalf of all the other Gentiles, and he makes the decision on their behalf. Okay, 46. The Ramah, based on the Rashba, who maintains that it is unusual for a Jew to rent land, to rent or lend a house to a non-Jew in the building in which he lives, and therefore he says it's not. He wouldn't do it in a way that would make it prohibited for the Jews to carry. Of course, the Chayyad. Okay, everyone. Next week we'll learn about how you do the renting. What does that mean to rent it out from the Gentile? What does that mean what kind of procedure do you make to rent that space from the Gentile? Again, this is something that's very large when you have a big Eruv in a big city, not just a small courtyard or a small apartment building. All right, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining. And again, I want to thank Rebecca for your help on the research of how this works nowadays, because otherwise we would be in the dark. And Be'ezus Hashem, and the schus of learning the laws of Shabbos and getting ourselves more knowledgeable. It's like it says, the Shemer Shabbos brings the Geula, so we should all be zeicha to the Geula Shlem of Amitis.